UFC Vegas 85 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to get things started in the heavyweight division with Thomas Peterson, a minus 166 favorite. The comeback on Jamal Pogues is plus 140. And this one is very dicey right off the rip because we have on one hand Thomas Peterson, former Dana White Contender Series fighter, hasn't really fought anybody, and he came to that Contender Series fight against Chandler Cole, basically just took him down and mauled him pretty quickly. So I still have some question marks with this kid. He faced very low level of competition on the regional scene. I know he fought over an LFA. He fought for the heavyweight title there, lost to Waldo Cortez Acosta. But he's a guy who has your typical heavyweight power, but he's also got an okay ground game. Like, he likes to muscle his opponents to the mat and then rain down some vicious ground and pound. We saw him get the submission on Contender Series, but that was actually his first ever career submission. He typically just tries to rain big shots, ground and pound, and basically just maul his opponents until he breaks them. And I think that could happen here against Jamal Pogues, who I think is just untrustworthy at this point. Pogues is another former Contender Series fighter. He actually fought twice on Contender Series, and the second time he didn't utilize his wrestling as much as we saw the first time around. I think he was trying to put on more of a show, but he did show off some improved striking. He's got a solid jab, kept decent pace in that fight as well. And then he went back to the wrestling a little bit in his UFC debut. So I'm like, okay, he's not bad. He's got some skill set here. And then he follows that up in the Mick Parkin fight, where he basically looked terrible on the scales. He looked super sloppy. He looked overweight. And then he didn't throw the volume that I expected. He didn't go to the wrestling at all. I don't even think he shot a takedown in that fight. So Mick Parkin just basically out-volumed him for 15 minutes. It was a very poor showing. And I think because of that, it's hard for me to have confidence in what to expect. What version of Pogues are we going to get here? Because I could kind of see a world where he does stuff the takedowns and he is the better striker over 15 minutes. But at the same time, that version of him that came out against Parkin isn't lost on me. And I could just see another scenario where Peterson is able to get that early takedown and Pogues just kind of looks for a way out of there. So I'm going to side with Peterson. I have some concerns with this guy, but I think he can probably get the finish here against Pogues, and then maybe we could fade him with a better matchup down the road. So we're going to go Peterson by KO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Marquel Mados, a minus 135 favorite. The comeback on Landon Quinones is plus 114. And this is a fun matchup. We have two guys, young prospects, both primarily strikers. Quinones fights out of the southpaw stance. He fought his UFC debut against Nasrat Hakparas, and it was one of those times where we saw a debutant fighter, didn't really know a ton about him, and it seemed like he outperformed expectations in that debut. He kind of went toe-to-toe with Nasrat, ate a bunch of really big shots there, seems to be pretty durable, and he landed a ton of volume of his own as well. Now, he still clearly lost that fight. He lost, I think, 30-27 on 2 of the 3 scorecards, so it's not like he was close to winning that fight, but it was relatively competitive. I think it was a good feather in his cap, especially for somebody that we didn't really expect much out of. And then on the flip side, Mados fought on this past season of Dana White's Contender Series. He was in the Week 10 finale. I actually picked against him in that fight against Isakov. He just wasn't able to get any of his grappling going and then basically gassed out and gave up. Mados looked excellent in that fight. Takedown defense was on point. The striking was on point. The footwork as well. And he fights out of Factory X. You see that in his fighting style. He's got a good jab. He'll mix in the leg kicks as well. He's very athletic as well. He's not the best wrestler, but because of that athleticism, he's able to power some guys to the ground, and that's something that he looked to do a lot on his regional tape. He went to his wrestling in a lot of those fights. Now, he isn't a clean grappler, so he ended up losing position in a lot of those spots, but I think in a fight like this, where I think it's going to be super competitive in terms of the pace, but I think Mados probably has more power, and I think he's probably the more likely of the two to mix in a takedown or two. So I think those two things should be enough to swing some of these rounds. So the official pick is going to be Mados by decision. But in terms of DraftKings, there's multiple fighters from Mados up in that upper 8K range where they have basically negative odds value. The line has moved against them since DraftKings released the pricing. So ownership's going to be very interesting this week. It's a full 13 fight slate, and we have like 4 fighters in that range where the betting odds moved against them. So you're getting odds value on the dog, which means we might get multiple strong pivots in that range in terms of getting an ownership discount. So keep an eye on ownership projections. Of course, I'll have the first run up on Thursday evening for subscribers over at FightNumbers.com. We're going to go with Mados here, and I'm contemplating betting an over here because I do think both guys are pretty durable. So even though I expect it to kind of be a firefight, I am leaning that this one hits the judges' scorecards. Next fight up, we have Julia Stoliarenko, a -130 favorite. The comeback on Luana Carolina is +110. And we'll start on the Stoliarenko side. She's an easy fighter to break down because you know exactly what to expect. She is an armbar specialist. 10 of her 11 professional wins have come by submission, and all 10 of them have come by armbar. So we know what to watch out for her. Now, her wrestling has never been good. Her striking has never really been good either, particularly defensively. She's kind of a punching bag on the feet. She's also been knocked out 3 times in her career. Carolina's got some issues of her own. There's no doubt about that. But I do feel that Carolina is the better striker. She should be able to use that range that she has, mix in the kicks more. Anything she's throwing against Stoliarenko is probably not going to miss here. She just needs to worry about the takedowns because we know if Stoliarenko's able to get her down, Carolina tends to get sloppy in those type of exchanges where Stoliarenko can absolutely pull off a submission. But outside of that, like, I kind of think Carolina's better than the market is giving her credit for here because we've seen multiple times now, even in her last fight against Petrovic, who's a known wrestle grappling style, was unable to really have much grappling success. Carolina's not the easiest fighter to take down. She defends takedowns at 76%. And so outside of like Stoliarenko being able to force a grappling exchange early here, I really do think Carolina takes over in rounds 2 and round 3 and does enough to get the better of the striking exchanges. So we're going Carolina by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Jingliang Li, a -148 favorite. The comeback on Blake Bilder is +124. And this is a fight that I think you want to have exposure to on DraftKings. I really think the winner of this fight scores well. And I'm not super confident in who wins the fight, but I am more confident that I think we see a pretty solid DraftKings score of the winner because I do think the way these two match up leads to a finish a lot of times, which makes me have interest in the under 2.5. It's currently lined as a pick'em. I think this fight ends in a finish at a pretty high clip here, so I'm probably going to have some sort of under action this weekend. I'm going to side with Lee just because I just trust him a little bit more in terms of the durability. So in a fight that I think these guys are going to stand and trade, I'm going to side with the guy who I think could actually take a few big punches. And I'm just not as convinced that Bilder can. This is a guy who we've seen get hurt multiple times across his regional tape and in the UFC. I do not trust his chin whatsoever. And in a fight against Jingliang Li, who we know is not super technical. He's not the cleanest striker, but he throws with some vicious power trying to take your head off. And if he connects clean with Bilder here, I think Bilder's going to sleep. Now, the other side of that argument is Blake Bilder is clearly the better submission grappler of the two. If this fight were to hit the mat, then I think Bilder is live to dominate those grappling exchanges and potentially find a submission. So it's not a case where I'm going all in on the Lee side. It's one where I'm going to be hedging it on DraftKings, getting exposure to both sides across multiple teams. But I'm going to side with Lee just because I trust his power and his durability a little bit more. We're going Lee by knockout. That's the official pick. Up next, we have Themba Gimbo, a -238 favorite. The comeback on Pete Rodriguez is +195. And this is probably one of my hotter takes of the card because I like the underdog here in Pete Rodriguez. I think a lot of people are sleeping on his striking ability, and I think it's going to be a massive advantage for him in this fight against Themba Gimbo, who doesn't have much striking, to be honest with you. He just wants to kind of use those teep kicks before eventually shooting in on a sloppy takedown. And that's really his base. Is he's more of a volume wrestler. He's pretty sloppy. He's not super clean, but he does average over 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. We saw AJ Fletcher, my guy, basically club and sub him. We saw him get the better of Takashi Sato, but that one wasn't super surprising because we know Sato has no form of defensive grappling. And in this fight against Pete Rodriguez, I just think the striking advantage of Rodriguez is going to be the biggest factor here. He's a very good boxer, and even though, yes, he was knocked out by Jack Della in his UFC debut, go back and watch that fight. He was going toe-to-toe with Jack Della for the first couple minutes. He ripped the body multiple times. He landed a few good combinations of his own as well. And then in the Mike Jackson performance, yes, Mike Jackson's a bum, but look at the combos he's putting on him. He's a very smart, high IQ fighter. He's out of MMA lab. He's going to mix in the leg kicks. He's got a massive power advantage as well. And he's fighting somebody in Gimbo who has to get the fight to the ground. And I'm just not as convinced as the market is at this price that Gimbo's going to be able to do that as easily as people think. So if Pete Rodriguez is able to shuck off those first couple takedowns, force Gimbo to stand with him, I think it's going to look like Pete Rodriguez is the legitimate favorite here, unless Gimbo can get the fight to the mat, because that's the concern with Rodriguez, is he's never fought out of the first round professionally. He's definitely more of a front runner. Most of his wins have come by first round knockout. So there is a world where maybe he doesn't get that first round knockout and Gimbo's able to just grind on him. The takedowns come a little bit easier in rounds 2 and round 3. But I honestly just keep going back to the striking difference, and it's so clear to me that Rodriguez is going to have such a big advantage there that I think he finds the chin of Gimbo, and I think he knocks him out. We're going Pete Rodriguez by knockout. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the flyweight division, we have Azut Maxim, a -205 favorite. The comeback on Charles Johnson is +170. And I don't know how many times I got to say it, guys. If you've been listening to me for a while, you know that I'm not really a Charles Johnson guy. Never have been and never will be when they face him up against somebody who I know is going to be relentless with the takedowns, who's a better grappler. And that's what I expect here from Maxim. He's a 17-0 undefeated fighter fighting out of Kazakhstan. 12 of those wins have come by finish. And I think he's got a massive grappling edge here. Charles Johnson, yes, he can defend takedowns well initially. He can pop right back up after being taken down. He's very difficult to control, and he's very difficult to submit. And that's fine. Those are great feathers in his cap. But what he's not doing when he's fighting off all those takedowns, when he's stuck against the fence, when he's fighting off submission attempts, he's not scoring points. He's not winning rounds. He's not getting any offense going. And you see that in basically all of the fights where he's facing these guys that are just going to keep shooting takedowns on him. And that's what I think is going to happen here against Maxim. And then the other side is Maxim's a good striker, man. Some of these previous guys like Estevam and Muhammad Makayev, like some of these fighters don't really have much striking to worry about for Charles Johnson. Maxim is a legit good striker as well. So I'm not even convinced that if Charles Johnson can keep him off his hips, I'm not even convinced that he's going to be winning the striking exchanges either. So I think Maxim gets the job done here. Tyson Nam's super hard to take down, super hard to control as well. So I think it's just kind of one of those things where it was a bad stylistic matchup. This one's not the greatest either, but I do think it's good enough for him to convincingly win these rounds and get his hand raised. We're going Maxim by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the women's strawweight division, we have Molly McCann, a -278 favorite. The comeback on Diana Belbeza is +225. And for starters, these two actually fought already back in 2019, early on in their UFC career. Molly McCann absolutely dominated that fight. So now that Molly, my girl Meatball's on a 2-fight losing skid here, been submitted multiple times, they're like, what do? We got to build Molly back up. Let's go give her Diana Belbeza, who she already beat from pillar to post basically in that first fight. And I kind of expect more of the same here. Now, obviously, both fighters have made improvements since then, but Belbeza, while she is going to try to keep pace with Molly, I don't think she's going to be able to do that. Not that she's not capable of doing that, but I think if she's even keeping it close enough on the feet, Molly can just go to the wrestling. She landed 5 takedowns the first time they fought. We've seen her in other fights as well where she does have the wrestling advantage. She'll mix in those powerful double legs to swing rounds. So it's a fight where even though she's giving up the reach like she usually is, she's going to be the one landing the bigger shots, landing the takedowns as well. I think Molly gets it done here. In terms of DraftKings, it's a very interesting slate because I already mentioned that upper 8K range with favorites where the line moved against them. And now up top, there's really no super clear spend up options this week. So I'm not really sure yet how ownership's going to shake out, but Molly McCann, 9,300, it seems expensive, but we just saw a female fighter in Jasmine Jasudavicius absolutely break the slate and break records are the last UFC card, and By the way, the first time they fought, Molly put up a score of 109, so it is certainly possible that she can find a ceiling here. So especially if we're not really super confident in any of these other spend-up positions, I'm okay with going to Molly McMann here in a fight that I think she's going to keep a high pace and could land multiple takedowns and maybe even get a finish if she gas pedals her late in the fight as well. So we're going to go with Molly McMann by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Gilbert Urbina, a minus 205 favorite with Charles Radkey on the comeback at plus 170. And we'll start on the Urbina side. He's coming off a knockout victory over Orion Kase last May. He previously fought on The Ultimate Fighter and, of course, stepped in short notice for Tresean Gore and fought Brian Battle and ended up losing that fight. But he's a pretty solid, well-rounded prospect. He likes to keep a pace on the feet. He's an okay striker. He mixes in the grappling pretty well. He averages around 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's a capable submission grappler, and I think he's going to have multiple advantages in this spot over a guy like Charles Radkey, who's coming off a decision win over Blood Diamond Mike Mathetha back at UFC 293, and he just really didn't look all that impressive to me. Yes, he swings with a lot of power, but he doesn't throw a ton of volume. And despite having what we thought would be a clear grappling advantage in this fight, he really struggled to take down Blood Diamond. He struggled to really threaten with any submission. So I really don't think he's all that great. And I think while he can test the chin of Urbina because he does swing with power early, I think he's more of a front runner. I think he's got to hurt Urbina early. Otherwise, I think he's going to start to fade. We've seen that in multiple fights. He hasn't fought a full 15 hard minutes many times in his career. So I favor Urbina down the stretch here. Urbina's cardio has looked great in the past. I mentioned the pace as well. I think Urbina can potentially break this guy down the stretch, and I favor Urbina if it hits the judges' scorecard. So we're going to Urbina by late round TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Alizkab Kizraev, a minus 162 favorite with Mahmoud Meradov on the comeback at plus 136. And this is one that I mentioned before. Kizraev's one of those fighters where we've seen the line move against him throughout the week, so I could see Muradov being a very popular underdog play here. So Kizraev could present us with a pay up to be contrarian type of leverage spot this weekend, and I think this is an okay matchup for him. For starters, Kizraev's a 12-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Russia, and he's another one of those fighters that has rarely fought outside of the first couple rounds. He's been to decision 3 times now. He did win all 3 of those. And I do think his cardio is probably going to check out better than people expect. You know, in multiple fights where it did get out of the second round, even in that Ty Lulin fight, who I know is a complete bum, but that was a high pace in the first round. And you saw him in the second round, his cardio seemed completely fine. He was barely breathing heavy. And then, of course, he got the submission victory. Now, all 4 of his submission wins have come by rear naked choke. He's a very good wrestler. And if you give your back up to him, he's very good at finding the neck and finishing you off. And that's a concern with Muradov, because in a lot of those grappling exchanges that we've seen, the Gerald Meerschaert fight, the Kai Bohayo fight, Muradov tends to give his backup in some of those grappling exchanges and when he's defending the takedown. And I think if he does that here, he's probably going to get submitted. Now, the way that Muradov can win here, obviously, he's going to need to knock this guy out. 17 of his 26 wins have come by knockout. I think if you think Kizraev's going to start fading, which I don't really think that, but if you do, then maybe Muradov can defend, you know, the initial storm in round 1, defend the takedowns, keep it standing, and then just take over late. But I think Muradov's cardio's been a little bit suspect at times as well. So I'm just not super convinced that there's going to be a big cardio edge for him here. And I am convinced that there's going to be a wrestling and grappling edge. I think this guy's okay. It's a little concerning with the time off between fights, and there is still some question marks with him. But I do think I'm going to lean on the wrestling and the grappling advantage here. We're going Kizraev by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have my girl Natalia Silva, a minus 340 favorite. The comeback on Viviane Araujo is plus 270. And the value boys are probably going to try to hype up Araujo here. But this one's all Silva to me. I think Silva is clearly the better striker. I think Silva has a massive cardio edge as well. And I think if Araujo tries to grapple her, she's only going to get tired even faster. And we've seen that time and time again over the course of her career, and it's not getting any better the older that she gets. She turns 38 years old later this year. We've seen multiple times where even if she's having grappling success, like the Caitlin Chikagian fight comes to mind, she's in dominant position for a lot of that round 2. And then as soon as Chookagian gets her off, she's immediately a standing corpse. And that's concerning for her because her striking defense is never good to begin with. Basically, anything up the middle is landing clean on her. Chookagian landed multiple knees. Andrea Lee dropped her with a clean left hook as well. She's a punching bag on the feet. It gets worse the more tired she gets, and she historically fades after round 1 in just about every single fight. And now she's getting older. These things are not going to be getting better, guys. And then on the flip side, Silva, I think if she keeps improving at this rate, she's going to be competing for a title in the future. And she's going to be a much better striker here. Powerful leg kicks, high pace. She's not an easy person to grapple either. So I'm not even sure that Vivi's going to be able to get the takedowns if she goes to them. And if she does, we've seen her get sloppy, get swept as well. I think Silva will be fine there. She's not just going to lay on her back. So this is one where I think Silva is really going to gas pedal her down the stretch. I think Silva by decision is more likely, but you better believe I'm going to be sprinkling some late round finish props on Silva this weekend because I do think that's in the cards if Araju starts to gas pretty bad here. So we're going Silva by decision. That's the official pick. At 9,500 though, and I said this about Jasmine, I'm going to double down and say it again, even though I got burned there. 9,500, I don't know if she's going to be able to do enough to have a ceiling here at that price to be on the optimal lineup. I feel better actually about Molly putting up a big score because of her propensity to grapple and mix in 5-6 takedowns. I don't know if that's in Silva's bag. So even if Silva does get a late round finish, I think it's primarily comes in the striking. So that's where I'd be a little bit more okay with coming in underweight to Silva. But that's something that we'll cover later on the DraftKings Deep Dive show on Thursday night at FightNumbers.com. And of course, I'll link that in the description below. And I did want to plug real quick, guys, this is the last week to get your free 30-day trial over at FightNumbers. That's where you'll get ownership projections, you'll get my DraftKings fighter rankings, you'll get a GPP leverage column where I'm basically talking about the biggest leverage spots of that specific slate. And then you'll get the DraftKings Deep Dive Strategy Show. That's where I'm literally just talking strategy for about an hour, answering any questions from subscribers. And of course, going over the Fight Pick Sim results in real time with subscribers, talking about how many times fighters end up on the optimal lineup based on the picks that I've inputted. You'll also get access to that tool. You can run through it as many times as you want. It gives you a DraftKings projection, the amount of times they end up on the optimal, and a percentage with that as well, along with how often they land in that DraftKings projection range. And then you can customize it based on your picks. So you could say Pete Rodriguez knockout in round 1. Let's do it. And then the next time you run it through, you say, okay, what does it look like if Gimbo submits him in round 3? Keep everything else the same, and you'll see the differences in results as far as what fighters are ending up on the optimal lineup based on how you think the slate plays out. So it's a very fun tool. And again, this is the last week to get a free 30-day trial. I'll link it in the description below. $0 to sign up. If you like it, hopefully you'll stick around. But if you don't, that's cool too. Either way, check out the site. There's a lot of cool stuff on there, guys. Now back to the fights. And next fight up, we have Randy Brown, a -238 favorite. The comeback on Muslim Salikov is +195. Now these guys were originally booked to fight back in December. I had a bet on Salikov there. Obviously, it got voided because Randy Brown pulled out of the fight due to illness. But I'm probably going back to the well and going to back my guy here again in Salikov, just because I think I've always kind of been a Randy Brown hater. Not that I hate him personally, but just his fighting style. Like anytime you see guys who fight like him that have these big money line price tags, it's just very difficult for them to cover because they typically are winning on thin margins. He's not a super high volume guy. He's not really much of a finishing threat whatsoever, maybe with his submission game, but certainly not with knockout power. And then he's also fighting somebody in Salikov who's a very technical kickboxer. He comes from a high-level kickboxing background. He's a good striker. He's very strong defensively. And you see it in a lot of his fights. He just makes it hard for his opponents to get off on volume. So I could see this one kind of being a low volume, hang out on the outside, leg kick each other. And then I think Salikov has the power advantage as well. So if it's going to be a close fight where if Randy Brown doesn't really look to grapple and it's a close striking fight and Salikov lands a big shot that maybe wobbles Brown, who has been finished multiple times in his career, I'm going to take the dog shot here in Salikov. I think he's being a little bit disrespected here. I think multiple dogs are barking on this card, and I think he's one of them. So we're going to go Salikov by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Renato Moicano, a -180 favorite now. The comeback on Drew Dober is +150, and I mentioned the line movement on a couple of these fights earlier in the card. This is another one. Renato Moicano, the line has moved in his favor by about 50 cents since DraftKings released this pricing, so he's going to be one of the more popular fighters on the slate. He's currently a bigger betting favorite than multiple fighters priced above him. So that's one thing to keep in mind in terms of ownership and roster construction later in the week, because so many people are going to gravitate to that odds value and then ignore those guys above him because their lines have moved the other way. So it's just one of those things that we'll talk through more on the Thursday show. But in terms of the matchup, Moicano, I picked him to win, but it's not super confident because I think this one is just pure violence either way. Moicano, he's a very dangerous, slick submission grappler, one of the best rear naked chokes in the division. All he needs is one grappling exchange here to end Drew Dober, because we know Drew Dober has clear holes in his defensive grappling and has been submitted 4 times in his career. So that's certainly a big advantage for Moicano. On the feet, though, Moicano, he has been knocked out multiple times. He's been knocked out 3 times in his career. Drew Dober, the one thing we know he has is that big left hand. He's got massive power. His last 7 wins have all come by knockout. And I think these guys are going to bang from the opening bell. So it's one of those things where I could see Dober catching him and knocking him out. And I could also see Moicano just forcing a grappling exchange and just instant tapping Drew Dober here. So it's going to be one that I think on DraftKings, you want exposure to both sides for sure. And if a lot of the field is going to go to Moicano, then still play Moicano because he does have that clear ceiling, but also take a good piece of Drew Dober because you'll get that added leverage. He's not going to be low owned, but if we are going to get any type of ownership discount, I still think he has clear knockout upside in that first round. And I do like violence in this fight as well. So I'm expecting the winner to score well. The official pick is going to be Moicano by submission. Which brings us to our main event in the middleweight division as Nassourdine Imavov comes in as a -166 favorite. The comeback on Roman Dolidze is +140. And this is one where I'm going to side with Imavov, guys. I think he's one of the better prospects in the division. He's just super clean, super well-rounded, good striking, good pace, good pressure, and solid durability as well. And on the flip side, you guys know that I've always been kind of lower than the market on Roman Dolidze, to my own detriment, because it's burned me multiple times in the past. But how many times is this dude just gonna high roll some crazy finish against some of these fighters, like the Jack Hermansson fight? Hermansson was clearly winning that fight, made one mistake, and then boom, he's dead. But I think Dolidze's also still, there's at least some part of him that's still that guy that lost to Trevin Giles, that completely gassed after about 7 minutes in that fight. His cardio has been suspect in the past. It looked better against Marvin Vettori, and some people thought he might have even won that fight. But I also still have some concerns about it when you ask him to go 25 minutes here potentially with one of the better prospects who I do expect to be just nonstop pressure in his face throughout the entirety of the fight. So I think this is one where it's clearly round winner versus big moments guy, and you guys know that I'm almost always siding with the better round winner, and I think that's clearly Imavov. I think he proves that in this fight and potentially gets a finish in the later rounds. We're going Imavov by TKO. That's the official pick. And as always, thanks for joining, guys. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and go check out FightNumbers.com. This is the final week to get your 30-day free trial over at FightNumbers.com. Lots of tools and content. You guys are definitely going to enjoy it, so please go check it out. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you guys next week.